So welcome to the first conference of Summer School 2021. I'm very happy that we have tonight with us Sami, Khatib, Boris, Buden, Keti, Chukhrov, and others who are joining us for the discussion. The conference is titled Contradiction, Antagonism and Negativity. The conference is meant to be the first iteration of a series of events co-authored with Sami Khatib. Primarily, it came out of a discussion that I had with Sami regarding my interest in antagonism, theoretical framework coined by Ernesto Laclau and Antagonism. And then the discussion went on, going on the direction of Sami's readings on negativity. Primarily, the starting point for me was Laclau's and Mouf's position that without antagonism, without the space for confronting each other's argument, there's only the imposed consensus of an authoritarian order. Mouf said a well-functioning democracy calls for confrontation of democratic political positions. In relation to art, and this was also quite important for my interest and my research, it's important to mention the position of Claire Bishop, an art historian and critic, who suggests antagonism does not signal the expulsion of utopia from the field of the political. What is more, for Bishop, a democratic society is one in which relations of conflict are sustained, not erased. However, it's important to mention also a position of Nicolas Gouliot, a curator and art critic, who introduced the notion of human relations as a point of departure in art. He had said, art no longer tries to represent utopias or create space for conflict. It is trying to construct concrete spaces to invent possible relations with neighbors in the present, rather than bet on a happier tomorrow. In contrast, although much art has seen in art room for artistic rehearsals, test cases, and pre-enactments of political situations, but he posits the emergence of antagonism to turn he posits basically the necessary emergence of antagonism to turn the artist's position into a political position. This was basically my starting point in initiating the conference. The abstract of the conference has more or less the other side, and it starts with Sigmund Freud and how he diagnosed Unbehagen in the Kultur, discontent, uncanniness, and uneasiness in and with modern culture and civilization. If in the age of capitalism, the modern subject is not the master in her own house, as Freud said, effects of fear and aggression, estrange social relations, cultural life becomes reproduced negativity in a denaturalized way. Taking its cue from Freud and ambiguities of cultural discontent, the conference invites a conversation with a broader conceptual framework based on figures of negativity, antagonism, and contradiction. The further abstract of the conference is here in the space, and I will not read more. I will give the floor initially to Sami Khatib for his intervention. Then we will continue with Keti Chukhrov and Boris Buden. I want to thank everyone who joined this effort, and I hope this is only the start of a larger discussion. Sami, please.
Hi, Albert. Hear me. Albert, I think now I have our feedback. Do I? No, it's better. Okay. Thanks for inviting me, for having me, and sorry for not being there on site as every year, but next year, I promise, I'll be back. I take this opportunity to say a couple of words about Albert's and my idea for having this conference. As you have heard, it is one of the first materializations of an ongoing conversation that we had over a year. Everything has been delayed, as you heard, thanks to negativity, i.e. a virus that was uncontrollable, which is still the case. So I say a couple of things about the relation between antagonism and negativity, and why I still think, even beyond or even before I would talk about Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, that negativity is a concept, a figure of thought, and a real movement, an actual movement that is very productive, not only in politics or political economy, art, culture, and psychoanalysis, and generally a social struggle. Albert, I hear myself always twice. I think it has to do with the microphone that I maybe, I think the speakers which are behind you are probably the one that, but it's okay. I can do with it. But it's, you can say alienation of voice, which actually brings me to negativity. For my introductory remarks, I'll limit myself to just negativity and why or how we ended up talking about negativity. So, Albert, you remember when we talked about antagonism, I said as a shorthand definition, what is an antagonism? A non-sublatable opposition, a non-sublatable contradiction, something that in its very asymmetry, dialectical asymmetry persists. And of course, it comes from a political economic theory of class antagonism, that class struggle is not a zero-sum game. It's a bit like, you'd say, capitalist social relations. The relation of workers and capitalists do not add up to a sum total or could be subtracted and end up zero. No, the entire social relation in capitalism is asymmetry, is contradictory, and in terms of class relations, but also generally political social struggles, is antagonistic. Antagonistic means they enter struggle, they enter a relation, but it has nothing to do with what one may call a vulgar Hegelian understanding of there is a mediated contradiction, let's say position A, position B, they interact, and then there would be a negation, a first negation, and there comes a double negation, and then this contradiction is resolved, you can say healed or somehow reconciled, and then the next social relation, the next negation could take place, and so on and so on. That is, of course, a vulgar Hegelian understanding of how oppositions A, B, or whatever are as extremes mediated in and through themselves. Of course, I object this reading. I think it has nothing to do with Hegel, and I think it's not very productive. So if we think about antagonism, that there's a certain asymmetry of the positions at stake. Classically in Marx, you could say worker and capitalist, but you can also say in other struggles, in all feminist struggles, in decolonial fights, you always have an asymmetry of forces involved. So you cannot say position A fights position B and you have kind of a symmetry that would enter a dialectical relation. That had nothing to do with dialectics, of course. There is an inertia, there is, you could say, a dialectical relation off track. There is something, you could say, that cannot be processed through dialectical movement. It's not that position A and negation of position A as B would be sublated as something reconciled extremes, and then you can move on with the next negation. No, there's always something that remains or that pushes the movement towards, let's say, imbalance, instability, negativity. You can add some other words here. This was yeah, my kind of shorthand interpretation of antagonism. That's how we entered the conversation. That's why I said negativity is actually an interesting concept, because it unbounds, it ungrounds, it puts to the test, it moves, it is something that in its very, you can say, conceptual indeterminacy produces determination, however, is something that you cannot fully account for. So negativity is another way of saying the social relation, whatever social relation in modernity, is a social relation that is not based on positive elements or on a one. No, social relation is constitutively a relation of non-relation, something you can say tainted by or triggered by or produced by or reproduced by negativity. I won't go into the Hegelian understanding of work and desire and the theory of recognition. Some of you will know that is the famous, infamous theory of Herrschaft und Knechtschaft, or master and servant relation, as how do we enter social relations? How are we always already in social relations? Why these social relations as desire and desire broadly conceived are always asymmetric, negative, and never add up. Add up means they never form, let's say, fully constituted, or you can say they never add up in positivity that you could account for and calculate. So starting with negativity is starting with minus, but with an indeterminacy of minus. Starting with negativity is the entry point for any non-liberal understanding of the social. So it's not atomized individuals who enter some social relation. No, you're always already thrown into a social relation. The social relation is not produced by contractual, whatever, contrat social fantasies that people would, come together and produce something together, a society, a community. No, that you're always already driven into something you don't want, you are alienated in, you're not at home at, you are even inside of yourself, you're broken, there's negativity working within you, and that what is within you is always also outside you, that you are not at home in yourself, but you are externalized, you're exteriorized, you are alienated, entfremdet, to use more technical terms of Hegel. And so the social relation is not the one between an all one or atomized 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. No, it is something that is, you may say, porous. Can say there is always something at stake that doesn't add up, that will never be reconciled as a full social relation that is self-conscious of itself. No, it is basically driven, you can say driven social relations. And that maybe also brings together the discourse of psychoanalysis with the discourse of political economy. And of course, negativity is is a starting point that denaturalizes social relations. So it is a non-liberal theory of human and post-human relations broadly construed, and it is a non-natural, or let's be more precise, a non-fascist, maybe anti-fascist theory of the social, because we cannot find any concrete, solid ground or reason for the social. Who should be member of the society, of a community? We cannot find that. We cannot give a rapport of the rapport. We cannot say why it is the case that for the contingency of being we have entered social relations, why Boris is there, why am I there? There is no natural substratum to which the social could give expression. That's why I think negativity is still something that also exceeds an inverted form of vitalism, you know, some kind of course I'm vulgarizing now, some kind of spring well of aliveness that would be there, that would also be unaccounted for, some kind of life force that then later society tries to frame and so on. I'm not talking about that. I'm also not saying that negativity, starting with negativity, is an inverted form or a reversed version of vitalism. I'm only saying, conceptually speaking, there are certain advantages to follow the path of a non-liberal and a non-naturalizing theory of social relations. And these social relations, of course, you can theorize in the discourse of psychoanalysis as the unconscious. You can theorize negativity in terms of a philosophy of history, basically saying that history is constitutively beyond control, out of control, or use the Marxian phrase, hinter dem Rücken. It's a movement behind your backs. While you're intentionally acting, something happens that is beyond your control, involuntarily happen. You can say that is how negativity shows itself in history. You can have it in terms of drive, a theory of drives, that desires could never fulfill the push of drives, also formerly known instincts as the wrong translation of Freud's Trieb. There is something that drives us, literally drives us, that will never be satisfied and reconciled. You can say this is a kind of negativity at stake. And of course, you have it in language that now I take this from Laden-Dolar and Lacan, of course, that if the unconscious is structured like a language, that means that negativity is another way of saying we are in language. Language speaks itself through us. We are not the masters of our own thoughts, even though I'm at our own thoughts, and we're also not the master of language. We don't have an access to language as organon, or as something that you could actually formalize or algorithmatize. That opens another huge topic about, do machines dream? Do machines have an unconscious? If machines do not have an unconscious, they're not driven by negativity. They are, so to speak, with Hegel and Marx speaking, not working. Because work, to be a laborer, means to be exposed to negativity, or to give cultural meaning, to produce products by being exposed to negativity, to something which is not you, where you encounter that of you, which is where you are alienated, that part of you which is not you in yourself, but for yourself, which is outside of you. When you encounter that and work on it, this is basically negativity at work produces, but only a negativity that means haunted by an unconscious that speaks through you. Maybe you are the medium of which, but you're not the master of which, even though you may claim authorship to it. But that's why there are various reasons why I think negativity could be an interesting entry point. I mean, I would like to give the word to Keti first and Boris and maybe others before I share a couple of slides with you. I have prepared two slides. One is on Bataille's question to Alexandre Kojève, a very famous reader of Hegel, and it's basically asking about what happens after negativity. Can we think further when the dialectical machine, so to speak, stops? But I throw this in maybe later. And the other one would be, what is negativity in psychoanalysis? And there I rely on Laden-Dolar and his essay on Hegel and Freud. But that already gets a little bit technical. Maybe we need a bit of more preparation before we are there. So as a shorthand definition, no, of course not definition. Don't get me wrong. Hegel has no definitions because it's movement. But let's say as a pre-understanding of negativity, I would say something that starts from split, which that drives and moves itself by splitness. One splits into two, something that will never be satisfied, never be, you can say, will never enter a stable relation, something that will never be fully accountable for, something that ungrounds any form of, you'd say, fantasy of the social based on the one or singularized elements. This would be something why I think negativity is still something to think about, through which social relation could be thought. And I think antagonism, political and also political economic antagonism, is for me a figure of negativity, because I'm not, arguing now with movement Laclau about who is the best Hegelian or anti-Hegelian. I'm just saying it means that there is something in the social contradiction which we can call antagonism, where this antagonism is unsublatable, undoable, so to speak. And why this is so, and why this is productive or unproductive, or productive for something which goes beyond the paradigm of production and work altogether, maybe something we can discuss later. So, but I think, Keti, I spoke already a lot, and I'll share my slides. If the moment calls for it, please go on.
And should I be the first, or maybe I speak after Boris's presentation?
Oh, please, Boris, where are you? Please. If you want. These just confused introductory remarks that I will come back to it anyways later. Boris, what do you think? Keti or you?
Keti to proceed.
Sorry?
You, Keti, you go ahead.
Okay. Okay, at some point, are you there, Albert?
Yes.
At some point, I will ask you to help me with the screen. Okay, actually, I decided to join this discussion, although I was only told about it yesterday, and I just remembered that there was whole issue of Stasis dedicated to negativity, which impressed me some time ago. And I was thinking a lot to what extent negativity is erased more and more from cultural politics, from real politics, but as well from education and from the consciousness and horizons of my students, for instance. Therefore, it was quite important for me not so much to share what I want to say, but also to hear what I could learn from you. I think the role of negativity is important not only because it somehow opposes contemporary conservative turn and right-wing turn, but also because nonetheless dangerous are the intrusion of depoliticized happy industries of design, fashion, show business, and monetized networks into the sphere of culture and social production. And this is what I see nowadays, for instance, not only here, but elsewhere, where critical theory and academia are attacked by natural sciences, brain sciences, and this is all very important. I think that natural sciences, microbiology, biophysics, bioethics should be definitely researched, but they should not occupy the place of critical theory and of social agency. In this connection, just to mention how negativity is somehow hushed in real politics, and how Putinism works with it, for instance, because everyone thinks that Putinism is about conservative ban and prohibition of certain opposing and critical opinion, but in fact, it wouldn't be as productive and as efficient as it is if it didn't use more subtle technologies and subtle methods. So how it works, it actually does not ban the critical discourse or contemporary culture. It simply appropriates and sweeps those packages and labels and shells of contemporaneity and then stuffs it with incompatible contents. Imagine that all of a sudden we are sitting here and we are talking about critical culture, and we are pretending that certain absolutely reactionary values are critical. And it's a little bit like gaslighting, that you use a certain kind of conservative values, but put them as the stuff into the shell and into the package of critical discourse. And this I see also in the practice of my art students, who less and less want to occupy themselves with any critical issues, especially in the sphere of design, where art practices are completely fused with fashion, with digital studies, with networks. And for instance, they are constantly upset that contemporary culture and contemporary art has to do with certain radical practice. And they ask me, and can it be that something that deals with beauty, and can it be that something deals with the freedom of the market can be somehow sneaked or used as contemporary art? I say, no, this is not possible. But I think that if this proliferates, this will be more and more possible. For instance, I remember one of the cases when my student, for instance, is making a PhD, and she's very upset that art audiences and, for instance, film audiences are different, and they work politically and strategically in a different way. And she claims that she's writing a critical work. And in fact, what she criticizes is the critical discourse from the point of view of show business. And then she writes a critical piece, which is protecting and defending show businesses on behalf of contemporary art academic program. And I think in this situation, when we are not simply in the condition of right-wing policies, but in the condition of depoliticized fantasy world, when art is critical art or paradoxic art or negativist art is superseded by some kind of digital fantasies and fashion ruminations, I would say. And this I find nonetheless right-wing or neoliberal than simply authoritarian governmental policies. This would be really a small problem if it were only the issue for the post-socialist states. But if you look, Albert, you have been in the UK and you were at Goldsmiths, right? Or at the moment you were making your studies.
Not at Goldsmiths. No.
Okay, anyway, but what I noticed there is that more and more, I notice the automatic aestheticization of certain spheres who do not belong to art, which come, for instance, from science, from ecology, and you simply make an aesthetic twist and it immediately becomes art. But this negativist agenda that was constantly important for art, it simply disappears or expires. So we see more and more self-design, techno-fantasies, folklore, for instance, pretending to be indigenous, and you see some indigenous practices. Of course, it's important to have these decolonial practices, but in fact, this is nothing but unproblematically exposed folklore, plus performative narcissism. And I have seen quite a number of research, for instance, nowadays, which already claim that this reluctance to talk paradoxically about artistic practice or to talk politically about it, even without claiming any right-wing agenda, is right-wing latently. So I made some sort of map of the negativity, which is much more the map for myself, and I would like to hear the comments about it, which would help me to deal with how negativity is treated, because also it went through various mutations and fusions. At some point in the philosophy of Adorno or psychoanalysis, it's clear-cut. But if you move, for instance, to media theory or post-Hitler media theory, that or artificial intelligence studies, then all this negativity tradition is lost. And I wanted to map somehow how to orient and navigate in these conditions. So I delineated 7 groups or 7 clusters of negativity. And the first one is modernist radical negativity, which is personified by Adorno, Agamben, Derrida, Bataille, Krauss. You can, of course, prolong this list. Which is using the strategy of apophatic ineffability or Dadaist transgression, and it was very much grounded in anti-sociality of art. Why? Because capitalist sociality is negative, but one enhances this negativity and alienation, analyzing and deploring it by means of apophatic ineffability. And unjust capitalist sociality cannot be surpassed. So this was very important for Adornian and radical modernist strategy, that you cannot surpass capitalist sociality. Therefore, art is an absolute alien. It's an absolute otherness, nullification of aesthetics, because aesthetics is something that is shared and it cannot be shared. And it is definitely anti-human, but aware of this macabre fatality. And of course, this Adornian apophatic approach formed artistic practices to a very considerable extent. And if anything is dear to me in art, it is this extreme negativism. Second, Sami very proliferously dwelled on psychoanalysis, and definitely psychoanalysis, not only the classical one, Freudian, Lacanian, but also Žižekian and the one enacted by Mladen Dolar. It helps us to somehow organize certain kind of fence against those practices that are erasing the possibility of the negative, transforming everything into some kind of flow of facts or flow of data. And what is really crucial for this kind of negativity, that it brought up the clinical discourse, and it brought up crisis and clinic as the discursive categories. And I completely agree, culture and its discontents is crucial here. And it follows, of course, Adorno's rejection of culture. and definitely all kinds of populist forms of harmonization, because it speaks about impossibility of harmonization in terms of keeping this crisis constant and learning how to live with this crisis. And definitely it also puts at stake the humanist issues, as it is constantly aware of its negativity. The third cluster that dealt with negativity but chose another strategy, somehow subverted or twisted this negativist strategy, is of course the Mobius logic, which we come across in Althusser, Foucault, Deleuze, Guattari, Lyotard, to a certain extent the Spinozist thinkers, or those thinkers that were much more influenced by Spinozist thought than the Hegelian Hegelian one. And in this strategy, alienation is approached as affirmativity. Sociality is negative, as in Althusser's interpellation. But on the other hand, this is precisely what constructs subject. Again, these philosophers, which I enumerated as the ones who deal with Mobius logic, they take some absolutely negative construct and then they twist it so much that you don't understand whether it's affirmative or negative, so that this dialectical contradiction expires, and instead you have some kind of open play of performative creativity, I would say. And if we today talk about performativity, of course, this excessive and extreme treatment of semiology in radically performative way comes from this tradition. And I would go on, for instance, how the negative notion is turned into affirmative. Foucault shows the negative genealogy and origin of bourgeois sexuality as the record of control, and then he shows how it turns into enjoyment. Deleuze and Guattari show schizophrenia as the feature of capitalism, but then they show how it functions as liberation from capitalism, as something that is endowed with creativity. So you cannot understand whether schizophrenia is a negative category or an affirmative category, whether it subjugates or liberates. And it's not so much about negation and affirmation, but it's the Mobius logic is when you don't know whether this notion subjugates or liberates. It can do both, liberate or subjugate. And Lyotard's The Tooth, the Palm, as well as his libidinal economy, pursues the similar logic when he says that to surpass alienation, you simply have to increase alienation to some kind of monstrous degree. This strategy thus is to increase monstrosity and negativity of alienation into some kind of subversive affirmation, but remain aware of such monstrosity. And this presupposes submergence into negativity as if it were neutral, quite like Empedocles of Hölderlin jumps into the volcano, and the society thinks that it's negative act, it's suicide, but the poet Empedocles takes it as a liberating affirmative act confirming life force. And hence Deleuze's numerous examples of Stoicism, when he talks about nonsense, about death, about dying, but he's not treating it as negativity and insists that it is a vital force. But of course, to my mind, this Nietzschean negativity is preserved here, even despite the play into vital and this transposition of political terminology, ideological terminology into biomolecular and performative terminology. And did someone say something? Or, okay. Interestingly, the nihilist heirs to it, as we know, are Ray Brassier and accelerationists. Now, the fourth cluster of negativity is the one that both Albert and Sami talked about, Castoriadis, Cornelius Castoriadis, Habermas, and Ernesto Laclau, Chantal Mouffe, which I definitely agree that this unsurpassable antagonism is very important. And in the conditions of capitalism, this tradition of constantly putting pressure on the antagonism was extremely important for cultural politics in the last 30 years. But still, I think that these are the thinkers of social democracy who include negativity, but to some point they softened this negativity through democratic forms of social negotiation. So their negativity is not Adornian negativity, or not even, I would say, Hegelian negativity, but also they are also different from Althusser's standpoints that Althusser reveals in his self-critique, or Balibar's approach to sociality, which he shows in his book of 70s, Dictatorship of Proletariat, because I mean, it's clear they discard Leninism, they discard Third International, and they insist on the politics of Second International, which means rejection of the discourse of communism. And Althusser and Balibar insist precisely on this term, communism, not simply socialism. So in this case, social antagonism substitutes class struggle, and the entity of class is a critical category, is a criticized category from Laclau Mouffe, and the issues of social and economic are transformed into rather sociality than economic questions. This was a little bit weird for me, because I think that, well, I'm here a Marxist orthodox in terms of really relying on the basis, on economic basis, as the generating force of all other social and political extensions. I think that if we think what kind of art was the complement to this social democratic tradition, of course, these are some kind of imitation of avant-garde, imitation of affirmative avant-garde art, you know, something that we called engaged art, something that were dedicated to commons in art. And I think that this tradition with Trumpism, and later with the flow of these philosophies of technology, or post-philosophies of technology, expired, and simply because it was too kind. This kind of art was critical, but it was about being good and about doing good things. So it was not macabre enough. And I would also say that when you, there is one example, you know, when you play the piano, to play something fast, you should be able to play something extremely fast, like presto, if you want to play something allegro. So if you want to have social democracy, you should have the horizon of communism. But if you only have the horizon of social democracy, then you will not have precisely this social democracy. So this is also a logical disposition. And the fifth cluster is a very interesting one, which is negativity that turned into the enjoyed positivity. And in this group, I would name all kinds of Foucauldian theories. So Foucault belonged to this second cluster with the Mobius logic, but at the same time, he belongs to this cluster as well, because these are the people who very ardently criticize psychoanalysis, of course, and on the other hand, they are Deleuzians, and this enables them and gives opportunity to somehow speak about affirmative vitalist politics instead of constant juxtaposition and dialectical split. This is also a counter-dialectical attitude. But to account for this strategy, I will remember Marx's critique of Bohemian lumpen commons in his 18th of Brumaire, when the Bohemia indulge in transgressive pleasures, in fact mistaking libertinage for emancipation. And in this case, exposure of one's deviances, something that is negative, something that is traumatic, something that is painful, stands for both revolt and emancipation. And epistemologically important in this strategy is that indulgence and carnival of subculture, or indulgence and carnival of trauma, is seen as the struggle. And what in fact is negative and has to be changed acquires the markers of enjoyed identity that is exposed and circulated. And I think that Documenta 14th was embodiment of and was pursuing this ethics. Thus, in this strategy, one sinks into negativity or into one's subjugation, but enjoys it as something positive and affirmative, claiming that since one enjoys this decadent and oppressed condition, it already stands for emancipation. And we know a lot of these kind of practices in art and in culture. And the sixth one is somehow inheriting from the previous one, which is post-humanist and new age techno-scientific essentialism, which bids farewell to negative politics and culture. And it is precisely something that is contrary to Freud's culture in its discontents, and generally to Adornian feeling of tragic loss, which for Adorno was extremely important. For Benjamin, this loss was extremely important. So this is the loss of the understanding of the loss. This is the loss of the loss. And therefore, lubrication or neutralization of negativity in the works of Latour, Karen Barad, Willem Flusser, Luciana Parisi, and all kind of post-Hitlerian media theory like Fröse and Ernst. And my students are constantly in these studies, and therefore it's also important for me. So this strategy extends the previous counter-negativist paths, the path of negativity as enjoyed positivity. It believes that politics, culture, humanities, social contradictions, philosophy are forms of metaphysics, and they should be superseded simply by positive or positivist description, natural sciences, and technical augmentation. Precisely this tendency is responsible for ousting the conceptual, Dadaist, paradoxical, political, and negativist moves in art and culture. For instance, the research about inhumanness of bacteria and viruses. I mean, contemporary art is teeming with people who research plants and mushrooms and viruses, etc. It's extremely important to research it, but what I doubt is the social agency of this phenomenon. So it is due to this tendency that maybe neoliberal or authoritarian cultural politics very smoothly correlates with emancipation theories of these post-politics and post-philosophies, because also in Putinist or very authoritarian neoliberal cultural politics, what they accept in art or cultural politics is precisely dealing with ecology or dealing with neural networks, and all kinds of fantasy, sci-fi issues. Last and final, the Soviet Marxist materialist dialectics, because it is also grounded in Hegel, which is personified by Ilyenko, Vygotsky, Bakhtin, Voloshinov, Leontiev. And just to very, very briefly say how negativity is approached in this case, and I finish here. Of course, in non-capitalist society, and many would argue with me that it is not completely non-capitalist society, etc. But I would claim that in the society of historical socialism, of course, negativity will be and is approached differently. And just brief examples. For example, Evald Ilyenkov treats negativity not as a focal point, but as a transitive tool in Hegelian teleology without totalizing its function. So if for Zizek, teleology is already surpassed by this dialectical hesitation, constant dialectical hesitation, Ilyenkov's philosophy needs the ideal, but not as something ready in advance, rather as the horizon which is constantly boosting this dialectical work. Meanwhile, the idea of contradiction is crucial for materialist dialectics, but as well the role of communist metanoia in the form of self-critique. And I think that the self-critique that was lost in the Western critique of capitalism after Althusser, I think returns in the socialist Marxism in the form of metanoia, change of consciousness by means of the Marxist self-work. So Marxism is a little bit like this Durcharbeit, like in psychoanalysis. So crucial is that censorship of the capitalist society, characteristic for the Western left, is superseded in socialist practice by self-censorship. And interestingly, the reason why the left probably lost is that they located critique outside of themselves. They were not aiming the critique on themselves. So self-critique was becoming more and more rare, whereas what was criticized was the capitalist society, capitalist alienation, etc. In socialist case, the problem is that on the contrary, the system represents common good, which the subject cannot enact properly. And in this case, instead of post-tragic negativity, we have here permanent communist tragedy of the insufficient communism. And the terminology with which materialist dialectics works is not so much negativity, but Andersein, Hegel's Andersein, the other determined non-self, which works in the procedure of dialectical otherness. And I would end here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, Albert. Yes, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Sami, and thank you, Keti. And I think it was actually a good decision of mine to come later to the stage, so as not to break certain line of thoughts, which I would say is philosophical reflection upon these three concepts. For me, my problem started from the very beginning when I saw these three concepts thrown before me on the table, and I immediately understood that this is an invitation or expectation to use them, to make use of them in terms of philosophical thinking and do something in that way. So all three evoking immediately the old privileged discipline of thinking, which is philosophy. And this is something completely spontaneous that you think, okay, these three concepts I'm going to think, to philosophize using these concepts. But whether, my first question is whether these concepts are really philosophical. What if the notion of philosophy is here totally out of place? What if we, instead of proceeding directly to philosophy, first shall ask some so-called transcendental questions, the questions about the condition of possibility, of the very possibility to philosophize with these, using these concepts. Let me first state that all three concepts are in English. All three are in English language. But English is not the language in which these concepts were originally generated, developed their philosophical meaning. Those who have some experiences of thinking, philosophical thinking outside of English language will immediately recognize and you guys, Sami and Keti, you really reminded us of this historical, genealogical background of these concepts, which is, Hegelian dialectics, which is Marxism, which is in terms of antagonism, and you, Albert, you mentioned the theory of radical democracy, Laclau move. Of course, not only what we see as a left theory. This is also, an evocation of Karl Schmitt and his concepts, which is rather right-wing, conservative, even if you like, fascist. So we know the contradiction evokes the concept of Widerspruch. Not only Marxist in Hegelian terms, the whole story of, shall I say, Bildung of spirit. I'm using the German word for something which does not have a proper English translation, which is education, which is formation. This is Bildung, formation, development, etc., from the subjective spirit to the absolute spirit. I'm just like reminding you that certain semantic genealogy of these concepts was created in different languages. And then that concretely all these three concepts stem from German, and the major part of their semantic genealogy is comprised in their English version in the form of translation. This is my point. In other words, the decisive part of their meaning has been generated through translation. Without having in mind their translational character, we cannot grasp their meaning and make cognitive use of them. And although we are sort of aware of this fact, this obvious fact, it is mostly ignored or even completely suppressed. Why thinking, even when if it exists on its historicity, on the historicity of its concepts and their meanings, is so blindly and opportunistically follows the paradigm of monolinguality and also of homolinguality. I will try to explain what do I mean by monolinguality. I mean, I think everyone here understands what is monolinguality. This is this idea that human beings are essentially monolingual beings, so that they have one single language, which is, and it is called your mother tongue, is more authentic, a language in which they are at home, in which they can, in a best way, express what they think, that they are, you know, in your so-called mother tongue, you are linguistically, culturally, socially at home. This perception is, however, the effect of historical emergence of modern standardized national languages. And just to remind you, in fact, the languages, the first one was the Spanish, that got grammar, and the purpose was clearly colonial, the interest of colonial power. This is why at the end, 1492, the moment when America was discovered, Spanish language got the grammar, was standardized so as to make language not simply a tool of colonial domination, but a weapon of colonialism, standardized language. So this is as I'm saying, monolinguality is a historical product, and it has been, constantly forgotten, this simple historical fact. If we think it is normal, it is natural that we, in the best way, express ourselves in one single language, we simply dehistoricize our linguistic practice. But what is homolinguality? It's another point. This is a perception of language as being an enclosed whole, which could be clearly differentiated from another unit, linguistic unit. This is the idea of a language that has clearly demarcated inside and outside. While we think that within a language there is the transparency, we understand each other. This is sort of a perfect communication that takes place within a language, while at the moment we leave the sphere or the field of this language, that there is the opacity of the other languages. And this is the moment in which the classical consensual theory of translation triggers or deploys translation so as to restore broken communication as a sort of secondary linguistic practice, something auxiliary linguistic practice. But the point is that this regime, homolingual regime of understanding of both language and translation, never sees translation as being within, always already being part of our linguistic practice. It always comes afterwards, after the language, which is also historically nonsense. But this is how the representation, homolingual representation of us, of language, naturalizes and historicizes linguistic practice. So, well, in fact, the homolingual perception of language is based, or to put it shortly, on the denial of translation. And this is when we look at these concepts of negativity, antagonism, etc., we forget the translational truth, the genealogy. What comes to my mind is a Hegelian Werdegang, which is the history of their becoming what they are. This is the dehistoricization. Both monolinguality and homolinguality provide a sort of instant universality to the meanings, concretely to our concepts. You believe you can use them without considering their translational origin. It is in this sense that the denial of translation has an ideological function, the one of dehistoricizing of thinking. Mono and homolinguality cuts off concepts from the history of their becoming. And the question is how to understand this. As I said before, the philosophical status of these concepts is unclear. Moreover, I suggest that they are no longer philosophical concepts, or to put it more precisely, they are, in their actual English version, the concepts of a former philosophy, not of philosophy. What is the former philosophy? I would define it very simply. It is a philosophy before it has become English monolingual. This is my point. And becoming English monolingual is also has also changed its name. So a former philosophy in its English version is what we call theory. So the concepts of contradiction, antagonism, and negativity are, strictly speaking, not the concepts of philosophy, but rather the concepts of theory. The question is, however, what is theory? And I will quote now an explicit definition of theory, which I have found in the Dictionary of Untranslatables, edited actually by Barbara Cassin, the first published 2004 in French. And in an English translation, Emily Apter defines, she gives a definition of theory. In her words, I quote, theory is an imprecise catch-all for a welter of post-war movements in the human sciences, existentialism, structural anthropology, sociolinguistics, semiotics, history of mentalité. She uses French. She does not translate it, untranslatables. You know, you have to use original because you cannot translate it. So mentalité, post-Freudian psychoanalysis, deconstruction, post-structuralism, critical theory, identity politics, post-colonialism, biopolitics, non-philosophy, speculative materialism that has no equivalent in European languages. Theory. What is in Anglophone world referred to as theory is in Europe simply called philosophy. Well, I think this is a dramatic change, you know, but it is closely connected to our linguistic practice. What we can learn from this is, first, that theory is itself untranslatable, is in fact an English, or shall we rather say, an Anglophone translation of what is in Europe called philosophy. Secondly, theory is culturally and linguistically a very particular concept. It does not exist in other languages or other cultural or in other cultural or intellectual traditions. In other words, what is in these other languages and traditions called theory might be something else. For instance, sort of counterpart to praxis in the philosophy. You can think of theory as being a counterpart of praxis. And as such, a particular problem or topic of philosophy. But it is not, to repeat, what is in an Anglophone world meant by theory. If, however, we consider the translational essence of the notion of theory, we might think of it as being, as I said, a former philosophy. Former clearly implies a temporal difference. Yet, this temporal difference is in fact a linguistic difference, the one generated by translation. Just to remind you that Benjamin's definition of translation is that translation is an afterlife, or again, fortleben, a continued life of the original. So I'm talking about linguistic difference as being embodiment of temporal difference. So when we switch to English, we switch to a different temporality. Let me now make my point using a formula made as a paraphrasis of a famous artwork by my late friend Mladen Stilinovic, Croatian conceptual artist, who in 1992 created this pinky banner with one sentence: "An artist who cannot speak English is no artist." I think we might apply it completely to theory and say a theorist who cannot speak English is no theorist. He or she might be a philosopher in his or her respective language, but at the moment that such a philosopher switches to English, he or she becomes automatically a theorist. You might optimistically think that this is a matter of equivalence in translation. The theorist is simply an English translation of philosopher in other languages, but such a translation would presuppose, at least to a certain extent, a symmetry between two words. However, translation is not about symmetry of meaning. It's always iteration. It's something else. It's production of difference. So this is not copying. It's something else. Some movement in meaning, change in meaning. To theorize is something else than to philosophize. Let's ask Frederick Jameson how to do it. How to do theory in his essay, Aesthetics of Singularity. I quote Jameson: "Since I have so often been accused of disparaging philosophy to the benefit of that unclassifiable new kind of writing and thinking called theory, I probably have some kind of moral obligation to suggest that what has replaced philosophy in our own time, namely theory, is also perhaps a kind of curatorial practice, selecting the named bits from our various theoretical or philosophical sources and putting them all together in a kind of conceptual installation in which we marvel at the new intellectual space thereby momentarily produced." This is probably what I'm doing, sort of installation with this concept. I am not taking them as granted. I am not, you know, I'm sort as I'm saying, it's sort of transcendental linguistic critique, which I am now doing, but it has the form of a conceptual installation, of conceptual. Jameson, for instance, he suggests that we shall think, you know, in the academic world, when we, you know, compose reading lists. In our old philosophy, you would use, you know, reading list of the major texts, put them together. This is philosophy. You know, would claim some sort of history. Historicity of philosophy is claimed. The claim to history of philosophy implies that there is a certain logic development, critique, etc., etc. But now this does not apply to what is called theory. And he says, this is very nice: if I were a literary guest curator, I might well stop a Flaubert seminar with all his favorite readings from the Golden Ass to Voltaire, if not his favorite readers like Joyce, you know. So this would apply to all philosophy that you study. You don't have to read Kant. You can read those or compose you know, your reading list of those who hated Hegel and claim this is what will generate knowledge on Hegel. But this is, as I'm saying, this is this new construction. So let me now keep my promise at the beginning that I will be not using these three concepts just to straightforwardly philosophize with them, claiming as something self-evident an instant universality of my thoughts. You know, I could have claimed it, that this is what's negativity, this is what is antagonism, etc. I have been trying to theorize with them instead, creating, instead of an instant universality, an instant conceptual installation, which, however, is not innocent. There is nothing innocent in practicing what we call theory, and especially there is nothing innocent in practicing theory here in Kosovo in English language. Why? Maybe Jameson has also an answer to this question. In the same essay, Aesthetics of Singularity, he also writes about regression to modernist theory and to the very idea of modern itself in a postmodern Western world. I quote, for in the thick of postmodernity, it is a statistical fact that more than ever, political and cultural commentators have returned to the ideal of modernity as something the West has successfully offered the underdeveloped parts of the world, euphemistically called the emerging markets, at a moment when modernization itself is clearly as obsolete as the dinosaur. What this means for us here and now, and I'm not claiming universality, I'm in a very, very particular place, which its culture has developed in a different language from the one I'm now using. But I'm not simply forgetting this fact, and I'm insisting on this fact. By bringing contemporary art to the post-communist Kosovo, that is, to the so-called former East, by initiating theoretical discussions around the three mentioned concepts, and by doing it in English, we in fact are providing nolens volens, without that we want to do it, an ideological service to the West. Concretely, we are modernizing an underdeveloped non-Western space. We are trading with contemporary art and theoretical discourses in an emerging market. This is what the concepts of contradiction, antagonism, and negativity actually are: commodities branded as modernization devices. And they work, sometimes even perfectly, like the spinning machines of the textile industry long ago being moved from Manchester to Bangladesh. While we can discuss them in the West innocently, which means claiming universality, claiming instantly their universality in its contemporary mother tongue, English language. I'm just saying that the theory has a mother tongue, which is English. Here we are doomed to a belated copying of the original. We take them on our non-native English tongues in the same way Saakashvili puts his Balenciaga sneakers. He to run after the Western cultural elites on the red carpets of Cannes, we to run after the Western academia. This running after, or as the ideology of the post-communist transition defines it more precisely in the Habermasian way, this catching up, nachholende Revolution, the catching up revolution. This is how Habermas defined the 89-90. This is a treadmill running. The catching up concept is designed by the intrinsic inability to really catch up. So something obviously went wrong. What went wrong and when? I would say the so-called democratic revolutions of 89-90. Now, after 30 years of an exhausting running in the treadmill of the catch-up transition, we might try to redefine this event. I suggest to call it the Identitarian Counter-Revolution instead of democratic revolution. While we have turned our societies into conflicting identities, getting also rid of the societies themselves, even waging identitarian wars like in former Yugoslavia during the 90s, the West has turned into the strongest normative identity bloc the world has ever seen. It is in this historical context that we can try to understand our three concepts I'm just like trying to put them in this concrete context. So with the fall of the so-called historical communism, it is the West that has lost its contradiction towards its ideological and geopolitical counterpart, the communist East, and with it, it has lost its history, becoming not simply post-historical, but ahistorical. That is not the end of the historical time, the last word of history, you know, in Fukuyama in this story, but rather its very measure, the measure of historical temporality. Moving history like the heavy industry to the failed rest, the West to the failed rest. This is like, you know, history is there like textile industry in Bangladesh. In getting rid of the very in the neoliberal global expansion of its capitalism, the West has also lost its political meaning, becoming post-political, which is, you know, strictly in Laclau sense, the political, which means the political truth of its social being. And finally, having ceased to encounter its historical negativity, it has turned angelic. It acquired the quality of absolute innocence. And you know, the innocence is a very strong Hegelian concept, and Hegel would say in the terminology of the spirit that only a stone is innocent, not even a child. This is absolute inactivity that makes you innocent. So you don't make mistakes because you don't move. This is what makes you innocent. Of course, in a concrete, totally through judicial ideologies, reinterpreted historical situation, we might think in terms of impunity, which is very concrete. Every country in this part of the world has signed a special contract with the United States about not ever extraditing American citizens to the Hague Tribunal, which is, you know, everybody had to do it. This is the impunity, but I'm not talking about impunity. I'm talking about innocence in terms of certain repressive sublimation of the West. And just like to conclude, you know, Saint-Just once said that those who make revolution halfway have digged out their graves. And this is actually what I think has what happened 89, 90, only one part was revolutionized. The other part believed at that time that there is no reason for any change. And this was the failure of the revolution. Okay, this is now my contribution, my try to problematize some sort, as I said, linguistic transcendental condition of possibility of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. Sami, I think we can open the floor for questions or other interventions here in the space, or
yes, please. Yes.
Virtually. I see we also have Nebusha with us. Welcome, Nebusha. So whoever wants to join the discussion, and I'll give some priority here in the space. But I see raised hand here. So David.
Boris, I'm a little confused about who you are saying. I'm a little confused about who you're saying is trying to catch up.
Yeah, just try to raise it.
Who is that exactly? Who's trying to catch up and essentially engage in the topic? Because earlier in the talk you were saying that Benjamin and translation is directed to the future and it's not a conflict. And in a certain way, Benjamin's conception of translation has nothing to do with the source material. It's really how it exists afterlife in translation. So who is this constituency that's trying to catch up? Is it people in Kosovo speaking English, or is it English speakers outside of this context? Because I'm just trying to understand. Okay, I mean, I accept the idea, the premise that three terms in translation mean something different in English than they do in how they originated, but I'm just trying to understand. Like, you're kind of leaving the talk on this idea that the subject, I don't know if it's subject B, the constituency for this philosophy is kind of off-center, and trying to situate themselves.
Thank you for the question. The notion of the catching up revolution is actually translation of the original Habermas concept of the macro and the revolution, which he coined already in 1989. With the point that removing the communist dictatorships in Eastern Europe opens the way for the East to catch up with the least developed modernism development in the West, which created simply this recurrence of relatedness and certain speed of historical temporality. However, the West was, created not only as something that is always up there, but as the subject of arbitrary subject of measuring who is where. So this is how we have the temporally, this is also culturally, economically, politically, socially define the so-called East of communist East. Of course, not only because it's generally colonial concept. It was always imposed on the other of the West, always, catch up. This creates, of course, not simply a historical injustice, but as you see, this is why I used this metaphor of treadmill. This is like you have the full circle these days, like if you think that abortion was first legalized, like divorce, abortion, and homosexuality decriminalized 1970 in Soviet Russia, then you can ask yourself what is happening today in Poland. and of course, also in Russia or Hungary, obviously some other ideas of temporality, progression, etc. This is what I am actually trying to problematize in terms of historicity. And it has something to do with Antagonism and what was the third? Contradiction. All three concepts of critical theory, emancipatory theory, which have been removed, with the establishment of the West as a normative identity bloc.
As a monolingual English speaker, I, of course, just thought about it from my perspective, what you said. It seems that this catching up, if it's like a double situation for a constituency here who's dealing with ideas in German, translated into English, but English is not the native tongue. There's only two people in this room, so it's this It's like a bigger dragon that's going faster, harder to. Anyway.
Just a little comment, but I wonder if that English we speak of though is a property of English speakers.
Anymore.
Isn't it really a property of theory speakers? And in that sense, for me, I want to take models of language from Joyce's Philippines away from all this kind of composite, which from one perspective is inaccessible to any language until you find your way within it. And theory is, in a sense, this compote, which I think is, I wouldn't let most English speakers have no idea what we're talking about. So it's not a good language.
First, as a native English speaker, you are in minority. Today in the world, the majority of English speakers are non-native English speakers. And it is only a matter of time when they will claim the right to standardize, to change, to transform, something similar to what happened to Latin in the 8th and 9th century. And this is already happening, and we don't know how this will be developed. At the same time, as you know, this will be the clash with the institutions, because English language is an institution, and as a sport, power, and every time you publish something, you need so-called native copy editor, and this is a huge power, but it is challenged. It has been challenged all the time. This is one thing. Another crucial question is what happens to other languages, like other mother tongues. My original call it Croatian or Slovenian. When you say today Slovenian philosophy, you don't think of philosophy in Slovenian language. This is the huge difference. When you say English philosophy, you can think this is English language. But some of you not in the line at all. They try to contract their respective in their mother tongue. But what is happening to these languages? They are increasingly denaturalized. They are, even for German language, they said that it is becoming new vernacular of no use for higher discourses, politics, philosophy, etc. I don't know how this will develop, but linguists are sure it is not about absolute hegemony of English language. The peak of its power is already defined, and the development will take other shapes. However, we don't know.
Say about Chinese.
Chinese is a marginal language in the world. In today's, you have the system of translation. 60% of all books in the world are translated from English. Then you have two, which is French and German, each 10%. Then you have peripheral languages like Spanish. One continent speaks Spanish, but less than 3%. And Chinese is a marginal language, less than 1% of all books are translated from Chinese. You cannot compare with 61%. So it's not about the number of speakers, it's about power.
Thank you very much, Boris, and thank you all. It was really very instructive and very interesting. I would say, Boris, to answer one point, because I agree very much with you on this historical point. I think the point is that what you show us through the language is that we have not to forget the historical construction. And so, in this sense, what can we do now with this three approaches we were talking about if we are in this new condition of language? And this seems to me a very important point. I'm certainly in the first category of Antonian inheritance through art, because the work of art shapes. And I would say to answer you, Boris, in this question is that if I think back to Dante Alighieri and the problem of language, The critical thinking that was not the same we are talking about. Nothing to do with that, but we can say that in Dante's there is a critical distanciation and reorganization of the thinking. And the language was this Italian that he could no more speak because he was a Florentine, he could no more speak because he was not in Florence. He was in Paris, he was everywhere, but not in Florence. So that the language that becomes again the language under the sun, let's say in Dante's terms, the language is the mother tongue because it is the tongue of the heat of the sun. This language could become a tool because he was outside of the mother tongue's place. And so it can become distanciation, digital reconstruction. I think that in this point, maybe there's something to get through this new condition and our English speakers and philosophers who are working with new concepts and so concepts out of the language. And maybe this condition to be out of the language can be a path to try to reconnect to these three concepts in a different way.
It's more of a comment. So
let's take few. Yeah, sure.
My question, I'll direct it towards Keti. You spoke a bit about identity politics, but really anyone could probably approach it. I'm curious though about just hear some further thoughts from you on sort of what things through negativity might have to tell us about sort of the present configuration of identity politics that is to play out kind of, I guess you could say, in the global north, where it seems as though we at the moment we really think of identity as being something quite concrete, essential, innate to the subject. As being kind of very actual about the subject. I'm thinking, I guess, of two philosophers in particular, Charles Taylor and his idea of the politics of recognition that sort of to assert oneself as being one thing or another, as belonging to a certain ethnicity or nationality, for instance, is crucial to actually sort of gaining political agency, political recognition, political rights. And I'm thinking about him in tandem with Edward Glissant, who proposes this idea of opacity of self, who points out that in another way the subject can never be recognized, is always sort of irretrievable and opaque. And I'm wondering, I guess, there's this thing also, there was Sarah gave a presentation earlier in the week where she gave this idea of identity as the opiate of the masses. So I wonder, I guess, what can be said sort of about the present configuration of identity politics that we see in light of negativity.
This was a question directed to Keti. Keti, if you can hear us. We cannot, yeah. Just unmute your
yeah, I didn't hear a word of it because I cannot hear. It's either a bad connection or it's an echo, which
Please try and repeat once again.
Sure. Can you hear me here?
Yeah, I'm listening.
My question was just regarding sort of thinking about identity politics and current configurations of identity politics through the lens of, or through the idea of negativity. Thinking back to what I was saying. Sure. To think about, I was thinking about two philosophers in particular, Charles Taylor and the idea of the politics of recognition, how recognition is, in order to acquire recognition, for instance, in terms of citizenship, one needs to sort of assert oneself as being concretely one thing or another, as belonging to a nation, as being of a particular ethnic background, etc.
I'm sorry, it's blurred. I mean, the sound is blurred. When somebody is speaking on Zoom, I hear perfectly. But when Boris was speaking, I could hear, but maybe a wrong microphone. Maybe you write in chat. Yeah, and then afterwards I will answer it.
No, sit there.
But this is not.
No, don't worry. Just sit there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Just go ahead.
My question was regarding.
Yes, now it's perfect.
My question is regarding how we can think of identity politics and present configurations of identity politics through negativity. And I was thinking about sort of two philosophers in particular who present sort of a contrast, I guess you could say, with respect to the idea of identity. Charles Taylor and the idea of the politics of recognition, of needing to sort of express oneself and one's sort of subjectivity, one's personhood as being actual and real and concrete in one way or another, for instance, to gain recognition for citizenship. And on the other hand, another philosopher, Edward Glissant, who talks about the opacity of self, opacity of the subject. And I guess I'm just noticing we're really in a moment where I guess we take identity for granted in the sense that it's seen and viewed and kind of understood as being very real and actual about the subject. I was curious to hear your thoughts, I suppose, about that in relation to negativity and I guess the absence of negativity in sort of present understandings of identity and how people relate to or express or feel attached, I guess, to their identity, to different aspects of their identity.
Just the mic. Your mic is muted.
And sorry, and what is the question precisely?
I don't know if there's a precise question in that, but I was just curious if you had any sort of further thoughts or could elaborate further on just the bigger notion of identity politics and.
I mean, you can endlessly speak about identity politics, but I'm interested in your interpretation. You stand for identity politics, or you think that the politics of negativity is ignoring the issues of identity? Because this is always the point of my students, that there is identity politics and identity politics, and to a certain extent, certain forming and certain transfigurations are the modes of representation and the modes of recognition. And definitely the idea of recognition is constructing the subject. So on the one hand, I understand your point. On the other hand, I would say that the subject is not an individual. The subject also is not in any way any particular commonality, but the subject is the capacity to grasp the common. So it's not that the common deals with the individual, and as Sami said, one is added to one is added to one, but the subject itself is the other self. The subject itself is already, as in psychoanalysis, crossed. So my question would be, maybe it's more productive to understand why it is impossible to fix your identity and to live with this maybe traumatic condition, rather than fix the identity and then inhabit it and then fight for another identity and then conquer another identity, etc. Well, this would be my answer.
Thank you.
Albert, may I join Keti's answer?
Yes, please.
It goes right to the core of the idea for the conference. Keti said there is identity politics and there is identity politics. And I think this should be taken really seriously, especially keeping in mind the chart or the 7 groups Keti presented us with. Of course, there are different readings. If you think about the politics of recognition, as a Hegelian thinker, you could still say that doesn't have to end up with, let's say, with Taylor or other philosophies of recognition that base themselves in Hegel. You can say recognition is based on misrecognition and asymmetry. This would be a different understanding of it. And also with Glissant. So it's not clear in which camp that should be. There is not a philosophy or theory of negativity, or that negativity needs a gesture of awareness. It's just a different politics is at stake the moment when negativity is disavowed. It's not that negativity isn't there. Negativity is still there, but it's disavowed. And that creates certain ideological formations. You probably know, I take this from Zizek, sexuality without negativity is sex, as commodified and identical. We would, of course, say any identity is based on non-identity. Or if you think about politics, politics without negativity means with disavowed negativity, produces another form, another configuration of the political. That's the social democratic fantasy and the liberal one. Or decoloniality without negativity, narcissistic folklore. But of course, it's class struggle. Or avant-garde without negativity, you have your engaged art. That is Adorno's argument against engagement, engagement. Or language, Boris, without translation is Google Translate. Of course, the work of translation, the working through, das Durcharbeiten is Durcharbeiten of negativity. And translation is also, you can say, the condition under which translation happens is the untranslatability. Same with identity. Identity is ungrounded in non-identity. And that is really a different way of thinking these relations of non-relation. That's why I would be hesitant, and I shared here Keti's point, in putting them, identity politics in a camp. We also know very well that identity politics is mostly attack from right-wingers who do not want to give up the gains that they enjoy as the beneficiaries of former, mostly colonial and otherwise violence. So it's really a point, where do you speak to whom? And Boris, of course, in which language? I leave it there. It's not really a question, but it is something of a follow-up commentary on Keti's point. But thanks for the question before.
To follow up and continue what you were saying, and also go back to Laclau. Democracy without antagonism is an authoritarian order. Just to go in the same, but also the viewpoint of the belatedness of Kosovo is a colonial viewpoint as well, right? So, and you can, it is a signifier of what the country went through before and the ongoing political reality. Just to add more, I want to include here if he's here with us, and just to check, maybe he can intervene in the discussion too.
Yes, but I don't know how to contribute, sincerely. For me, it is quite a high level of language itself and theory, of course. So maybe I can just share my experience of fighting with the term in project forms. like NGO traumas, like, because in most of the guidelines, even in very serious projects, you have some sort of by default direction of activities towards something that is explained as positive change. And when you ask what's positive and for whom, then goes some sort of, yes, in the end it becomes identity politics. But like there is some like very soap opera terminology, democracy, free media, open society, etc. That's my favorite, etc., etc. And like it's when there is opportunity to address, like in some consultations or something, that is like the point in which you want to stop everything that you can put that question. What's positive in that and for whom? Under given objective circumstances, after everything that happened in so-called post-socialist domain, which I would call anti-socialist. It's a much more accurate term. And second, I think, if I understood Boris enough, he sees our yielding to the hegemony of English as a giving up, some not giving up, but like some sort of given condition which is impossible. No, he didn't say it's impossible, but like that it is some sort of great handicap, and that it poses questions how to communicate it all. I think that there is a space, exactly because like English is changed against the will of its metropolis, like it's totally changed, and lives a life of disobedience, whether grammatical, terminological, like develops in its own way as each language is doing. So this, what we speak is, I would question which language is it, is this, this is some sort of vernacular to say, like this is art, independent art scene, theoretical leftist input. And I think that like common person from like England would have hard time to understand us, whether in level of ideas or a level of topics. So I think that there is a space. I mean, you just put in these discussions in internet, there are huge advances that are now impossible without participation in hegemony, linguistic hegemony. For example, conference in Cluj in Romania, only 10 years ago, couldn't be called as it was called this year, 30 years of capitalist transformation. Now it is called like that, which like gives, I think that it gave a lot of trouble to fundraisers, but 10 years ago, only 10 years ago, it would be called 30 years of hardship towards democratic change or something like that. So I think that, I mean, there is a space of fight, of struggle in this domain that we are, subjugated to, willingly or not. And that in the end, I think that English will fire, like the hegemony of English will imperial, not English like England, Great Britain. It is also subjugated to, let's say, global English, but that it will somehow contribute to some sort of equalization of access to global knowledge, to say like that, to put it like that, which is now living its own life. I think corporations and government of capitalist center, they cannot control development of global knowledge, which is, concentrated in some centers that they can focus at, and through like a discourse of new Cold War, etc., etc. But it's gone. they cannot control it anymore. It will give command to them. It is already giving command to them in their own language, but with the words and wording and syntax that they are pretty much shocked with, I think. Okay, that's my comment from what I could make out of what I heard. Sorry that I'm invisible. I see it now. I forgot to turn on camera.
I'll just give the mic to Boris. I think he wanted to respond or not.
Not necessarily.
Okay. Okay. So if there's any other.
Yes.
Yes.
A small question to Sami. Why do we use the word negativity rather than negation? And is it we can have a negation of the negation, which is crucial to Marxist thinking, but can we have a negativity of the negativity? It seems to me negation is an act and negativity is a kind of state. And so I just wonder about that language as we are talking language.
Thank you, Esther. Quick answer would be, I don't need the language of negativity the moment I have the Hegelian negation or a certain reading of that. However, I cannot ignore 100 or 150 years of Hegelian scholarship and Hegelianism as an actually existing effective force in history, where negation was to a certain degree stripped off, I mean, in its conceptual understanding of its negativity, of that which Mladen Dolar would have called the swerving, the kind of klinamen that happens in negation. And double negation is not a kind of a pyramidical or spiraling or whatever constitutive forming activity that works through symmetric oppositions that somehow are, mediated on the extremes. So to put the emphasis on negativity works in two ways. One way, it prefers a certain reading of Hegel as a philosopher of deviation, of ungrounding, of restlessness. And I mean, of course, it makes it also compatible with psychoanalysis. And second, that alludes to this one, it lends itself for another further work of translation into other theory languages. Oh my God, philosophy languages, I don't care. I don't want to have that. I think otherwise Hegel is for me only of merely intellectual history interest, and I have no point here in preferring this over the other reading of Hegel. But I think there is something in the thematization of negativity that goes also beyond Hegel, but I take it from Hegel, but from a certain reading of Hegel. And maybe this should be actually be said in the beginning, and I think you're totally right, as a kind of disclaimer. Why not saying double negation, or what is at stake in negation? If we think about negative dialectics, Adorno, do we prefer determinate negation? Do we think there's a problem in Hegel? Greatly addressed, I think, aptly addressed by Adorno. What is the problem if you start with determinate negation as productive and you end up in some kind of pan-logical universe where in the end everything is swallowed by some kind of homology of spirit? I don't think Hegel said that, but you can. And I can't ignore that these readings exist out there. So that's why negativity is also thrown in to actually lend itself to an ongoing Fortleben, an ongoing work of translation. I think it's very productive. And I would even go that far and say that Benjamin, to a certain degree, is also a thinker of negativity, but in different terms. And his translatability here for this discourse is, of course, based on the very untranslatability, and that's also on this anti-philosophical affect that I see in Benjamin. Okay, this would open now another. Sorry, long answer for actually I wanted to be much shorter, but thanks. Keti, switch on the microphone.
I wanted just to say that, I mean, when we say, when we talk about philosophy, well, definitely philosophy has to be translated from one language on the other, but on the other hand, I think philosophy is not the language, or it is not equivalent completely to the language. Although, I mean, in structuralist terms or in Wittgensteinian terms, it could have been identified with the language, nor is poetry the language. And Vygotsky, in his psycholinguistics, had this aphorism or some kind of standpoint that the word is ready when the notion is ready. So it's not that you first have the word and then have the concept, but you first have conceptualization, and conceptualization in materialist psychology was even the work of your body, because they were working with the Spinozism. So in certain sense, you cannot cut off or reject philosophy simply because it is now translated into English and it is only spoken in English. Because, I mean, even Socrates' act when he's drinking this piece of poison is first and foremost a philosophic act. So you cannot erase philosophic act. This is about this. And another thing is that all books that we regard as philosophic were written in their original languages. I mean, French, Italian, Agamben, everything is written in their proper languages. Yeah, so I would not be so totalitarian in terms of fixing everything and confining everything to linguistic categories.
Thank you so much. If unfortunately we have to keep it short this time, but I think we opened a lot of questions, a lot of possibilities to continue this discussion. I want to thank you all. Thank you, Sami, Keti, Boris here for your interventions, and looking forward to your course, Keti, and looking forward to continue this this discussion. Thank you.
Bye. Next year I'll be there, and then we have a proper class, a course. Bye, Albert. Bye, everyone. Bye,
thank you, Albert. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.